Daniel Mercuri. As the next governor of California come 2026, I intend to clean house. I served my country honorably as a black knight in the United States Navy. I stand for the Constitution, the Second Amendment, the protection of our children, and I only kneel for God.
If you don't know the law, there is no law.
As a constitutionalist, I know the law. California is not the reflection of the country I fought for. Californians have suffered enough rising crime, invasion of illegal aliens, homelessness, absurd taxation, power outages, and wildfires. As your next governor, that ends on my watch. As a husband, a father, small business owner, author, and a veteran, I will not let California go quietly into the night. To every corrupt bureaucrat who has subverted the right of the people and the Constitution, my message to you is this:
Justice is coming under my administration. Count on it.
Mr. Mercuri, Daniel Mercuri, thank you for being here today. Daniel Mercuri for California Governor 2026. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here. It tells me that you care very much about the people, and you say that often. I've spent the past 48 hours looking at as much information of yours and interviews and stuff as I can. I've got your website next to me, and it tells me that you care for being here today, so thank you.
Absolutely.
Now I just watched your interview recently with the Mountaintop Media Production. It was a great interview. You have some background in family court. I want to talk about a lot about your campaign and a lot of your policies. And my audience will be a lot of concerned fathers here in American Father. It's basically what I'm speaking to a lot of the time, concerned fathers, and that includes families and kids and protecting the kids. I know that that's part of your policy. And could you explain any information you have or any background experience with the family court system in California?
Actually, I mean, as far as like legal background, I don't have any legal background. It's just somebody who, I jumped into the race back in 2019, and it was, I was having my own issues with the state. I was having issues with things that were going on with my daughter. My daughter was diagnosed with a pre-B cell ALL leukemia, and I live around the Santa Susana laboratory, the spill laboratory, where there was 10 nuclear reactors, and one of them went off back in the 1960s.
Okay.
And basically, what ended up happening was she was diagnosed, and it turns out that she was affected by the land. The state kicked it down the road. The Department of Justice didn't do anything. The Department of Energy didn't do anything, and the legislative body kicked the can down the road, and then the judicial branch kicked the can down the road. And when that happened, that led me into what's going on with our courts. And I knew that we have corrupt judges, but I didn't know to the extent until I started going down the rabbit hole and really looking into case law. And of course, that led me down to family court. It led me down to a lot of things. And I just want to interrupt real quick. I just want to make sure, sometimes my earpiece, am I breaking up in and out when you're hearing me?
So far, you're very good. If anything, maybe super minimal, not even that I've really noticed.
Okay, I just want to make sure, because sometimes my piece, these things. And I'm so sorry again that I'm having these technical things.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I appreciate your time today. And my technical abilities over here are not super well myself, but so far, thanks to Zoom and recording abilities, I think we're going to do very well. And so you're from California. You're 49 years old. You're old enough to know what you're doing and young enough to be here for a long time. And in the family court system, I will have to say, kind of as my experience, I think maybe I represent a lot of guys that in the family court system, we are shocked as men. We grow up looking up to soldiers, policemen, mayor, governor, president as leaders, and we feel let down.
Yeah.
And in my own experience, in an immature way, I actually fell away from God for a long time, and things didn't really start picking up and getting better for me until recently when I came back to God. I came back to Christ, and I understand that you're a believer as well.
Yes.
And
Yes, I
so
am.
that's so good to hear. So it will make, anyone that can relate with me fall away from politics, lose any interest to vote, lose confidence in the future of our government, local government, state and county and city level. And do you have maybe a message that would encourage guys like myself to come back to a belief in following a political candidate? And just to say too, I've been looking at so much of your information for the past 48 hours, and I've learned a lot. And I'm actually convinced that me and my wife will go ahead and go vote again. I'll be very happy to vote for you. So that's
Thank you.
what I've seen so far. But what would you have to
I
say to
think,
authors like that?
yeah, I think you said the key words though, don't lose hope. And that's hard to say, especially when everybody is battling something. Everybody in the state. I've been all over the state. I've been down south of San Diego, all the way up to up north of Siskiyou, and every in between, Stockton, Modesto, and so on. So I've been to 247 cities out of the 483, and everybody's battling something. Everybody's doing is fighting against corruption.
Mhm.
And it's difficult because who do we support, who do we get behind, who is it that we talk to and really believe that they're gonna maintain their words, they're gonna keep their everything that they say. What is it that we're missing? And that's where the people really need to come in to vote their conscience. And this is kind of why we got into the mess in the first place. We stopped voting our conscience. We stopped participating in our local government. And that's the horror story right there. And this is why we fall and prey, and why government has taken over and removed God out of our lives. And this is one of the things that we need to put God back, especially when you read the Declaration of Independence and you realize what our forefathers actually stood for. They actually took from the Bible. It doesn't matter whether you believe them to be deists at best. They all went to seminary school, and it's obvious when you read the Declaration of Independence, you'll see God is in there. And it's actually, I've told people, the Declaration of Independence is really a new covenant with God, because you cannot bestow the blessings of liberty on your posterity without that covenant. And they knew this, and they understood that, they weren't going to force people to believe, but that didn't mean they were going to institute a foundation of where, they were going to derive government from. Right. That's why they say, that we've been endowed by the creator. They didn't say creators,
That's right.
and that we have been given, certain unalienable rights, among them. Among means there's more, right? To life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. They were very specific in what they were talking about. And the more I understood, the more I realized, gosh, when I vote, I really need to know this stuff, because the person, the person standing before me is pining for my vote too. So I really need to I need to understand the Constitution. I need to understand laws. I need to understand the Magna Carta of 1215. I need to understand the Federalist Papers and Anti-Federalist Papers. I need to understand just how powerful I really am. And if I don't understand that, it's going to reflect on the person that I vote for. And if that's if that's the case, then we have a big problem if I don't know what's going on, because the person standing in front of me is going to give me platitudes. They're going to tell me all kinds of things that they say they're going to do, but then they don't actually understand vested authorities themselves. And when you don't understand vested authorities, then you're lying to the people. And this is where, we the people come into play, to bring back in God, to bring back in the Constitution, so that we can pass down our liberties to our children. And it's our responsibility to control government. That's why I tell people they're not your leaders, they're your servants. So stop treating them like that. They work for you. They give up certain unalienable rights to be the gatekeepers. So
That's right. And you've mentioned, I've seen in a lot of your speeches or interviews, that God is actually mentioned 4 times in the Constitution. And you referred to Acts 17:31, for he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead.
yep.
I like that you mentioned that. So I went and looked that up, and and the responsibility to know the Constitution, especially keeping mostly, on track as far as family court experiences with myself. I notice and recognize and try to bring a responsibility to my platform that a lot of it is emotional. A lot of it is self-accountable to uneducated. And we can, give a lot of that to, or find a lot of that in a lack of education in schools, but also in self. We have a self-accountability. I got a ton of books behind me. I've read hundreds of them. I haven't read thousands of them. And I have some of the important, most important things here that I don't know, but I try and learn and study myself. The Constitution. I've even got a little bit of the California Constitution here and California's legislature. I'm not versed in those really at all. That's a self-accountability, but the importance to know the law and understand the Constitution is both for us and to choose, as you say, not a leader, but a servant for the governor of California.
Yeah, and I need to my earpiece is sticking out, so I'm going to switch up my microphone. I just want to make sure. Okay, can you still hear me?
I can still hear you.
How about now? I'm moving my big mic away from me and using the camera mic.
I can
You
still hear
me?
you. Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so you definitely said the key point again, where you said you just grabbed your state constitution, and I'm really glad that you did that because I've got mine right here. As you can see, it's a little shredded. It's heavily used.
And it should be. Yeah.
I always tell people it should be marked up like your Bible. It should be chalked up like your Bible because I tell people, your Constitution, when you look at it, that's your rifle, and your California State Constitution is your pistol, right? You really need to treat it in that way, and we need to understand what we're up against because one of my I guess you could say one of my quotes that I always tell people is, if you don't know the law, there is no law, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't really understand what they're doing and what they're drafting, then it's going to always negative reflect you because legislators don't draft bills to necessarily support the people. They draft bills that support, their unions or their donors, the lobbyists that represent whatever corporation that comes in because, a corporation can't directly come into their representative. They're there to actually represent the company as a go-between, and they always draft it to favor that conglomerate and area of industry that impinges upon an open and fair and free market that also negatively affects how we function in our day-to-day lives when it comes to our finances and our jobs and our employments and so on. It affects our ability to become an entrepreneur, and it affects our ability to go out there and compete. And this is the problem that we've got going on because you've got a lot of corporations and unions. Unions are key, that technically draft the laws that we endure. And our representatives draft here in California between 2,000 to 5,000 bills a year, and over 1,000 of them get signed into law by the governor. That's not for your benefit. That doesn't behoove the people to, engage in prosperity. That actually works as more of a business function for the state to try to figure out how they can generate some sort of revenue, right? Because it's always about revenue. So when you run the state like a business, you can't run the state like a business in the sense that you're trying to generate revenue and some sort of money stream so that the government can engage in some sort of pet projects, because anything that's a government project is taxpayer project, right? Anything that's a government agency is a taxpayer agency, right? When the government body is actually designed to come in and to sort of facilitate and negotiate the open market so that it always sustains compatibility with the community, and of course competition among younger businesses, small mom and pop shops that eventually could potentially become a franchise and grow. And that all is good because it creates more jobs, it creates better stability, and it does generate under the Constitution, under duties, imposts, and excises as to what can be taxed. And when you have more excise, meaning you have more businesses, you can take more from excise because of the fact that people are prospering. That's how the state function is supposed to function. When you run it like a business, and you only focus on revenue, then you have to find different ways to manipulate the laws to generate revenue streams. And that's what our legislators do, which affect our livelihood. And then, and when you look at the Constitution, I think it's under the Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, right? Clause 18 is called the necessary proper clause, right? That was actually designed between Adams and Hamilton. When you look at their debates and you look at the Federalist Papers, you'll see that Hamilton was more about
wherever the Constitution doesn't say it, it's permitted. But Adams was of the mindset of no, it's the definition to limitation of powers. So they structured it in a way that you have what's now called the necessary proper clause, and it only lists out 18 authoritative powers. Well, controlling the behavior of the people is not one of them. That's not on the list. So the government can't impinge upon parental rights. They can't impinge upon your ability to, engage in some sort of medical treatment of some kind like COVID-19 and so on, right? They can't tell you to max up, stand 6 feet apart. They can't tell you that you can't travel freely. You have every right to move freely. Like there's so many things that it says that that limits. So government's job is to stay within the limitation of powers, not grant themselves more charge and then expand upon their authority over the people, right? And so these are the things that we need to focus on to really becoming educated. And then again, this leads us down the rabbit holes of, corrupt courts, corrupt legislation, because they always change the language to change your perception, right? So this is why I say if you don't know the law, there is no law. And if you don't know your rights, you don't have any rights.
Mhm.
And we need to really pay attention to this as a whole, because this is really what's happening. And when you don't know this, you wake up one day and like I was speaking to people yesterday. I had a group of people I was talking to, small business owners locally in Los Angeles, and they didn't know that the state has drafted legislation that now they can actually they can dig into someone's trust and a living trust. And this kind of affects probate, right? When we have probate courts, right? Because everything is made public. So when you look at probate courts, there's a lot of these fiduciaries who, might be designated by the courts that negatively affect or take over somebody's inability to take care of themselves. And there's all this money laundering or stealing that's going on because the person can't take care of themselves and there's no oversight. So the real oversight from another department of consumers, I think it's consumers affairs or whatever, that department shouldn't even be in charge of fiduciary when it comes to people who are not able to take care of them. But the courts come in and deem, some fiduciary to come in and take over. And then all of a sudden all their money is gone. And then the heirs are wondering what's happening here. And somehow the heirs would get X'd out from being able to take care of their loved one. So, when you look at this, you got to realize, when we vote for judges, judges are both voted and appointed. They're appointed by the governor and they're voted in by the people, depending on, what seat they're aiming for.
Mhm.
So we have a huge responsibility at the end of the day to ensure that we are paying attention to those who are pining for our votes.
Absolutely. And I've noticed, and you just went over many of it right now, terms I think that would relate to as you've talked about steering the market and the working the language. Those are a few things you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of times they change the language, right? So when you look at changing the language to change perception, and we talk about let's talk about the Second Amendment, right? It's one of my favorite ones because when we talk about the Second Amendment, we talk about firearms, right? But that's not actually what the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, right, is necessarily, looking towards when it comes to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. When you look at the Second Amendment, right, you have the right to keep and bear arms. The word arms is you arming yourself. Well, you got to go back into what the Black's Law Dictionary says, because again, you've got to go back how far back when, the the Articles of Confederation, right? The Articles of Confederation, were based off of the Declaration of Independence, and then of course eventually became what we now call the Constitution of the United States, right? So when you look at the writings and you look at where their intention was, the word arm was already defined way back then. And that meant that basically it was anything that you could hold on to, anything that you could wield, anything that you could utilize to defend yourself, right? To defend one's life and to defend one's property. And so when you look at the new definition, when you look at, I think it's like Title 26, the United States Code Title 26, it talks about firearm. But firearm and arm are under two different jurisdictions. So firearm is actually under, again, commercial activity. And when you look at arm is under the Constitution of the United States, which is the right to life and the ability to defend and protect your property, to ensure privacy if one has to, fight for that. I mean, there's a whole litany of things that, that arm and firearm aren't under the same jurisdiction. And you have to ask yourself, well, why is that? Right. And again, this is why we have red flag gun laws here in the state of California that have really done nothing, but they're designed to chip away at the ability of the law-abiding citizen to defend and protect themselves. So they changed the language enough to go from arm to firearm, and then they put it under a different jurisdiction. And then when you have that, well, then when you want to go get a CCW in the state, people don't know that every state is required. In fact, it's demanded, that's already been ruled by the Supreme Court, that a state either is an open carry or it has to be a CCW, but it can't be both. But it's got to be one or the other, and the states have to decide between which is that. And most people have no clue what that is and why that's even an idea. So when people are fighting, I want to be an open carry, the state in and of itself has already made the decision in California, we're a CCW state. But then they put the jurisdiction in another jurisdiction under the county sheriff. And the sheriff is the one who then determines whether or not you can carry a CCW. But I already have that right. One, I already have that right because God-given endowment, the right to life. So I have every right to defend myself by arming with whatever means necessary. However, if you want to own the actual firearm, right, then you have to go to the CCW. But you already go through here in the state of California, the Department of Justice and the Department of Fire Bureau. When you go through that bureau, you go through a 10-day background investigation and cool down period. Once you get that, you're done. You walk out, you've already paid it, you've already gone through the background, you're cleared. You have every right now to be an immediate, the second you walk out the door, a CCW. Why do I need to go to my county sheriff? And then why do I have to go get training? I don't need to get training. You're not required to. In the Constitution, it doesn't stipulate that. The states break that down in a way where now I have to pay it. I have to pay a fee. Well, that's turning a right into a privilege now. So I can only have my gun in certain areas. If I'm out and about and there's some sort of attacker and I'm at a disadvantage because maybe it's a gang of thugs and I'm with my family and I have small children, I have no ability to, fight off, five gangs, five thugs. But if I have the gun, that's, we all call that the great equalizer, right?
Yes.
But I have to go get permission. But I'm already granted the permission, even in the state constitution under Article 1, Section 1, it says that I have the right to defend. And that's broken down into what, in multiple variations in Black's Law Dictionary. When you understand this, then you understand where corrupt government is charging you a fee thereof, which is called extortion. They don't have that authority, and yet we allow for it. Why? It's because we don't know any better. So they change the language just enough where they say, we're not infringing upon your Second Amendment. Technically, they're right. They just say, we're just trying to ban assault weapons. Well, you got to name me a weapon that wasn't designed to assault. They're all designed to assault.
Mm-hmm.
You see that play on words?
Yes.
So that's changing the language to change everyone's perception, and they do it in every area of industry and every branch of the government to do just enough where the people are subject to the government, not the other way around.
That's very interesting, and I'm looking at your policies on your website. What the website is, and I will have that across this entire video the whole time, so folks can see and not forget. On your policies for gun laws, one of them is to become a stand your ground state, expand the castle law to tie into the Good Samaritan law. And that just sounds to be something that's a lot safer because, as you're saying, folks are afraid, even in their own home, to protect themselves, and it gets them into a position that could possibly be fatal because the criminal is protected more than the victim.
Well, and the interesting thing too here is when we have our LEOs, right, our local law enforcement, they go out there and they come knocking on your door. A lot of times, I've also seen how local law enforcement agencies have actually attacked the actual homeowner who is armed, but he's on his property and he's not aiming it at them. He's actually afraid that there's some sort of an attacker or somebody who's invaded his boundaries, right, or past his threshold. And a lot of people don't know what that is. I've actually had just last year, I actually had local law enforcement come to my home because I had what I thought was an invader coming into my home and it was they were in my backyard.
Mm-hmm.
And so I armed myself. I was in my property. Now I have gates. So if you have gates in front of your driveway that are roughly, 6 feet or slightly taller, provided that you have natural barriers that maybe exceed that height, like say like a hedge, like a bush hedge, that is technically your threshold. So if it's closed and somebody hops it, I can shoot you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to ask questions. I don't need to determine why. It doesn't matter the innocence behind it. If I have signs under the castle law that are displayed all around my house that say do not trespass, or I have signs that say trespassers will be shot, survivors will be shot again. I'm warning you that I'm not going to sit here and have a conversation with you. You pass my threshold. Now, if you don't have that
and you have just your door, and your door has been opened from the outside, that's your threshold. The second that somebody tries to pass that threshold is the second you have a right to defend yourself. You don't have to explain yourself to the courts that you're in fear of your life, though that's what they need to hear. You have every right to take them out and not ask questions because they passed your threshold. They weren't invited, and they invaded your home, right? They trespassed, and this is where fear comes in because they're doing something that they are inhibiting the right of somebody else, and that is something that you do not have a right to do. You have the right to do freely and move freely yourself, but not to the invasion or to the impingement of somebody else's rights. Once you understand this, right? So then you understand the laws a lot better. But I've had local law enforcement come in here and they told me to lower my arms, even though my firearm was down, even though I was within the boundaries of my own home and past my gate. And so, of course, I cooperated. But at the same time, I had a bunch of 22-year-old itchy trigger finger cops that were looking to shoot somebody, even though I was the homeowner who was calling 911 saying that I have an invader. And because I'm a gubernatorial candidate, I've had several, countless threats on my life, on my family's lives. I've had people follow me. I have goon squads, try to damage my vehicles. I've had things thrown at me. I've had people call the campaign line and just leave, horrendous voicemails about, what they're going to do to me and my family and my home. I get it all the time. So I'm armed to the teeth. I have cameras all over the house. But at the same time, this is one of those things where we have a lot of law enforcement that don't actually understand the Constitution. They placate to policies, and policies don't always align with the Constitution.
Right, and I'd like to mention a couple of things as you're explaining this. I've heard you repeat the forefathers wanted men and women who had the willingness and fortitude to stand up in the face of adversity, no matter what the cost, even at the expense of their own life. And it is, part of your policy and your plan, which I love to hear, is to follow the supreme law of the land and work into public nullification of egregious and repugnant law. And I know that you refer that to, and I found that under studying your response to abortions, you have videos of that on your YouTube, and you have all of your policies listed on your website, but I'm sure that you're also referring to other egregious and repugnant law.
100%. Yes, it's every law. So every law that is repugnant, every law has not been designed to secure the rights of the people, right? So again, we go back, look at the Constitution. Governments are instituted among men to secure the rights. And you always say, what rights, right? Where you have to read the sentence above, which is unalienable rights, not civil rights. I've said this before. Civil rights are immunity and privileges that are given out by the government. And that government, when they give it out, it's under eligibility. Eligibility of what? The contract clause, right? So what are you contracted to legally have according to the civil rights, right? Like a driver's license, right? But it's your right to stay out and get out of cold weather and stuff. So shelter is a right, it's not a privilege, right? So these are the things that we need to focus on, is not civil rights, it's unalienable rights. And civil rights, really, even though we have the civil rights of the 1960s with Martin Luther King, the problem with that, though, is a lot of those policies were based in somewhat communistic, socialistic ideologies. And it gave more authority to the government to have say over people's lives as to what they determine is civility and what is permissible. But unalienable is granted by God. This is why people say, where do your rights come from? Well, the Constitution. No, they don't come from the Constitution. Constitution is designed to control government, not we the people. They're designed to stay within the limitation of powers. It comes from God, that which is of the laws of nature and of nature's God. So again, there's another where we're talking about God in the Declaration of Independence. Mm-hmm. So we have to make sure that all laws harmonize under the supreme law of the land. When you look at the supremacy clause, when we see all this, it's very easy when you understand this, then you know exactly who should be in office when they start determining or they start talking about what they're going to do and drafting certain laws. If it's repugnant, it's not in alignment. A lot of people think that just because it was voted and the legislative body passed it, that it's now law. Well, no, it's called falsely operating under the color of law that is over positive law. So you can't write egregious legislation and then put it over on top of, positive law that's in an agreement. If it's not an agreement, it's as if it didn't exist at all. And there's multiple Supreme Court cases that I have listed here. This is why I tell people, you put me in office, I'm going to have a field day with the judges. I'm going to have field days with the AG. I'm going to have a field day with district attorneys You know, they think that just because they're of the judicial branch that they have this greater power. They actually don't, because they require the executor. And an injunction cannot force an executor to enforce something that they have no authority to, because their job is to interpret the law. But the problem is when you look at like corpus juris secundum, if you look at American jurisprudence, and you look at a number of court cases that fit under Constitution, state constitution, it'll literally write in there that the courts favor legislation. So in other words, if you and I see a drafting of a bill, we don't like it, and we know right away that it's going to infringe upon parental rights. It's going to give more authority to, you know, egregious activist judges. It's going to take legislators, you know, and it's going to put more money in their own personal pockets, right? It actually forces the people to have to engage in a referendum to prove that it's egregious. Versus the courts don't take that favor. They side with the government legislative body first. They're not under the auspicious nature of thinking that, well, they would, you know, they're doing something nefarious. Well, that's not true. And so it puts the burden of responsibility on the people rather than the checks and balance of the government. And that's not how it's supposed to function. It's supposed to be the government that's supposed to function to ensure that there's a check and balance, that everybody's in agreement in securing rights. But the courts are designed to favor legislation because, well, they're not of the mindset that, well, they're going to do anything bad. And so it's up to the people to have to figure that out. That's not how this works. And so this is why I tell people, you put me in office, there's going to be a litany of egregious legislation that's going to be nullified. And people are like, well, how do you do that? It's called a public nullification. Public nullification is basically a drifting and a listing of bills that are falsely operating in the color of law to force both the legislature and the judicial to come back to the table and say, as an executor, I'm not going to execute these. Now, it's not an ex post facto. Ex post facto means you can't create a bill that would protect or eliminate something that's already egregious. It simply just says we're no longer going to enforce it. And so that's going to have them now look at the governor and say, well, wait a second, you can't just do that. No, you can't pass legislation on top of positive law. So it's going to force them to come back to the table and have to renegotiate, right? So now the people don't have to go through a referendum. The governor is going to do it for you. And while that's happening, those laws are not going to be, they cannot be executed. And if they are, then those members of those bodies of government branches are going to be removed forcibly, because it'd be a violation of their oath of office. Like, this stuff for me is so easy now. I can't stand talking to lawyers, because lawyers aren't about the law, aren't about justice. They're about the law and legal loopholes.
Yeah, an experience. I will keep, you know, looping back to family law quite a bit, but I'm also
Yeah, no, please.
Totally flowing the conversation back into everything that's important for your campaign and what you do, because it is important. It all comes together. Several things come to mind, and one of the things that, you know, that I've heard you repeat many times, and this is a really good schooling session. I'm so thankful to have your time here and to be able to have this on recording for people to go back and study. At least I'm going to value that immensely myself. In the Declaration of Independence, you say that it says that governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers by the consent of the governed. That's something that's, it's very important to you. Like I said, I've come to a place where I don't really even take the time to listen to any politicians, elected or unelected. And it's a breath of fresh air, especially the older I get. I'm about 37 myself, and it's not just a naivety. And I'll say in like younger years, high school, you're really pulled in, especially in the education system, really pulled into falling for liberal ideologies. I used to think Obama was a wonderful statesman and speaker, and I thought, well, there's nothing wrong with this guy. And as I got older and older, and things were revealed to me, a lot of the problems and stuff that are going there. And the more I mature, and I have so much respect for someone who constantly goes back to the Constitution and the state constitution, that really pushes me to take the initiative and responsibility myself to study it. A lot of things. Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead, please.
Well,
please.
That's something that, again, I'm glad you said that when it came to Obama. When you're young, and I actually just said this last weekend in Stockton. We were invited up, a couple of candidates were invited up there, and I told everybody, at the dinner, I said, when I was younger, I was a liberal and a Democrat. When I got older, I became a conservative and a Republican. But now that I'm wiser, I became an independent.
Yes.
Because even our forefathers warned us. When you read George Washington's farewell, you'll see like in the middle of his his farewell letter, you'll see that he basically tells everybody stay away from the parties, because the parties are actually going to present the illusion of choice, right? I'm paraphrasing,
Yes.
but this is the part when we the people need to understand that you really need to understand original intent, and that any representatives or anybody pining to become your representative should always derive their answers from the Constitution, not from a platitude, not from a position of telling you what you already know. I'm not a fan of other candidates who tell you out there and they say, I can't believe we have so much homelessness. We have the majority of the homelessness in our state, and almost the entire people that we have here that are living in California almost exceed the amount of bodies in other states as a whole. We need to fight against that. That's a platitude. And they don't really come up with a solution. And if they come up with a solution, it's not ever really derived from the Constitution. And that's why or that's how the person that's in front of you doesn't really know what they're talking about. And I can't stand when some of the candidates say, well, I'm going to ensure that if I don't know this, I'm going to hire people smarter than myself. No, that's wrong, because I always aim to be the smartest person in the room. I'm going to hire people who are exceptional at what they do, but I don't want them to get to a point where they know so much that they can pull the wool over my eyes. I'm going to be forced to have to know a lot about that area of industry, whether I like it or not, so that the wool does not get pulled over the people's eyes. That's what a servant does. That's how this is supposed to work when we put people in office to become who are the gatekeepers, right? Now, when we talk about our judges, the other thing too is that our judges have become massive activists. And when you look at some of the actions that they're doing, let's go back to family court.
Yes.
Right. Again, this is why I've been really enforcing in this conversation. You really need to know the Constitution. And when you look at judges, right, you look at the courts. The courts have a sort of have this edict about themselves, right? We talk about court edicts. They sort of had this procedural edict that most people don't know anything about. It's sort of the good old boy club. If you went to law school, you're part of the California Bar or the American Bar Association. They sort of have multiple oaths, and there's only one real oath that is demanded by the people, and that is the oath of office to the Constitution and state, or that you can read in the state constitution under Article 20, Section 3. And I do this all the time where I tell people are like, why do you give me the code? Because I want you to know where I found it, or I want you to know where it's at, so I'm not just blowing smoke. And why is that then important? Because you should need to know this. You want to make sure that the person talking to you isn't lying to you. They're giving you a starting point. They're telling you where you need to start looking too, so that you can start fixing some of the situations that are in your area of the state, or the problems that you're enduring right now too, and what it is that you can do. And so when you look at the courts too, right, for all crime is commercial. So let me go back. All crime is commercial or commercial activity. And what I mean by that is that in order for there to be a crime, there has to be an injured party, right? And what that means is that if I make a U-turn out in the middle of out in the middle of the night, 1 a.m. or whatever, and there's nobody on the road, but the red light doesn't change, and I've sat there for 10 minutes and the light still isn't changing, and I decide to make a U-turn, even though the light's not green, and there's a cop behind some, parking corner or whatever. If I make that illegal U-turn at 1 o'clock in the morning and he pulls me over and he dispenses tickets, who's the injured party? There is no injured party. Right. Government can't be the injured party. So when we go to our judges and you look at family court is not criminal. Family court is civil, right? So when you look at the 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendment that break down the courts, I think it's the 6th Amendment that talks about that we have criminal under the 7th, and then you have civil under the 6th, and then you have self-incrimination under the 5th, right? So when you look at this, and then you look at how the courts function, the civil court can't demonize either parent. In fact, it's not within its purview, but they do that anyway under family court codes. And so the court codes are designed to placate to a favoritism that they deem under the general welfare of a child to be either or of the parents. So one parent who may not understand this is put at a disadvantage, even if they're like an amazing parent, but they have a disagreement with some sort of ideological, political, or or even gender difference, right? The courts will always placate to, and I hate to say this, to what is Marxism, right? Because if you've ever read the Communist Manifesto that was written by Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, right? Anybody who knows anything about communism, you had to have read the Communist Manifesto, right? And it's obscure, it contradicts itself, it's lengthy, but within there, under Marxism, Karl Marx wrote the pillars of abolition. I believe there's 6 of them, but one of them is the abolition of family. So when you look at the abolition of family, then you can easily see the state codes that align with separating families. And it weakens the family unit, which also weakens what God told us when he said, be fruitful and multiply, and to honor thy father and thy mother, right? That's a family unit. When the courts separate that because of their own ideological differences, then the courts are actually functioning not under the Constitution, but under Marxism. And that activism is also where some of these codes have been instituted by legislators who have no fundamental background, who change the language to change the perception, and then they induce these codes that then subject the parents under these dubious jurisdictions that then under the judge's discretion can separate however they want. And then they throw everything under general welfare within the state codes, or health and mental health for the child once they enter their jurisdiction. When does the jurisdiction happen? When 2 parents end up in court. But then they criminalize one of the parents, which is illegal. They're not required to do that. It's civil. So how is one parent being criminalized when it's a civil procedure? And this is how you know that we've got a lot of corrupt judges. So as a governor, we only have in the state of California, do the research, I think we only have about 2,227 judges any given year, right? Maybe it's one year it might be 2,230. The next year it might be 2,300, and so on, right? Around that number is how many we have here in the state of California. And a small portion of them are appointed to the Superior Court status. That is by the governor. So then what else can we do, right? And I always tell people, start going after your judges. And there's different variations to this. And you can look at the California State Constitution. I'm sure you have. If you look at the Commission on Judicial Performance, right? There's a myriad methods of what that performance committee is supposed to do and supposed to function. But we never go after the committee. That's the problem. We have a committee that is supposed to ensure that our judges are acting in good fidelity per their oath. The problem is that they have 2 oaths, and sometimes 3, depending on, again, the bar, right? And there's 3 oaths. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of like what these oaths are and stuff, but we have the American Bar Association. Well, the ABA, right, stands for what is it? The British Accredited Registry, right? So
Crown.
you're like, wait a second.
Yeah.
Right. And people say, oh, that's not true. I've actually dug it up. I have evidence of that. I can send it over to people so actually, people can actually look at what this is. And internationally, if you want to be a lawyer that's recognized, then there is another oath that is that's joined to the British Accredited Registry. So you're like, wait a second, who are you serving? The Constitution or the Crown? It doesn't work like that. And then you have the California Bar Association. Of course, people say, oh no, bar only means when the lawyers back, under the Crown used to stand in front of a bar, and they call it the bench because the judge would sit on a bench, and then of course they were surrounded by the public, and then they would banter back and forth as to the legalities or the evidence of the situation, right? But that's actually not what that means. And a lot of lawyers are like, no, that's not true. It's totally true. So we need to start focusing on our judges, and we need to start focusing on the commission, the Commission on Judicial Performance. When you look at that, there's 11 bodies. The 11 bodies, I believe 4 of them, if I'm not mistaken, under the California State Constitution, are appointed by the governor. One of them, I think, is appointed by the legislative body. I think it's the majority leader. I could be wrong on that, but don't quote me on that. But and then again, and then they're comprised of lawyers. They're comprised of people who are retired and so on, right? But they don't really do anything. They're sort of just sitting on their tail. Once in a while, you get a response, but for the most part, people aren't going after our judges. They're not trying to recall. You know how many judges that have been recalled in the last, I think, 85 years in the state of California? You're gonna love this one. 1. There's only been 1 recalled And that just tells me, wait a second, they're the easiest to remove because when people vote, everybody just does down ballot voting. So why aren't you going after them? They're the easiest to get the signatures. You only need the percentage of whatever the governor vote. If the governor got a particular amount of votes, there it's like 10 or 20%. I can't remember off the top of my head of how many signatures that judge who's not been appointed but voted in by the people can be removed. And people are like, well, which judge should I go after? Pick one. Pick any of them. Start setting precedents as to the people are upset. And when activist judges do not start doing the things that they're doing, it's time for a recall. That's just one method. And then you have no one's performing the investigation on our Commission of Judicial Performance committee members. Why not? They're just as responsible for these judges who constantly put up injunctions. They actually create law, which they don't have the authority to do a lot of times in their rulings, because sometimes it'll set precedents, but setting precedents that they utilize what's called stare decisis, which is to stand by things decided. So if it's decided in one area, they're going to duplicate that same incidence in another court case because it's similar. And so they just sort of rule it the same way. But sometimes, every once in a while, they step out of their vested authority. But here in California, they do it all the time, and they end up creating law, even though that's not their job. And so when that happens, the legislature then says, "Oh, well, courts already set precedent, so they already had a drafting of a bill ready to go." And so now they pass an egregious legislation that was decided by the courts. That's not how this works. So we're not putting forth this effort. And then we have agencies tied to family courts, right? I think you have, what is it, like conservatorship, you've got probate, you got CPS. CPS steers courts, especially with family courts, to go in particular directions that these judges then listen to. And CPS is one of the most corrupt. Children go missing, they're ripped out of homes. There is no real follow-up as to what's happening with these children. I mean, I can go on all day about this stuff. And so now we need to look at CPS. But before you can do anything about CPS, I always tell people, go back to the history. When was CPS first created? And it wasn't in California. It was out of state. And then, of course, Los Angeles had their own procedural practices and protocols on how they were dealing with children and dysfunctioning homes. And so when that happened, of course, then came about CPS, and then of course the standardization that we try to have with it. But it's gotten out of hand. There's too many people that are sick of they're just sick individuals that take advantage of these families that are in disarray, and then the children get caught in between. I grew up in a dysfunctional home, and I was subject to that sort of disarray, and these social workers that came around, and I could tell too, they weren't necessarily trying to they weren't necessarily trying to solve the problems. They actually made things worse.
Yeah.
And again, you have a lot of people who are in as these social these therapists and socialists and or these
expert evaluators.
Experts evaluate. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I mean, you come across these people. They themselves don't even have kids. They themselves don't even have children.
Child
Some of these
appointed
judges,
attorneys.
Exactly. And some of these judges, they've never been married. They don't have children themselves. And not knocking people who are gay. I don't agree with that lifestyle, but I'm sorry, but you're gay and you've never had a child. You've been with a same sex, so you don't know what that interaction is like. You're completely, your mindset is not in that direction. That doesn't mean you've never adopted or anything, but I hate to tell it to you, but again, the family unit is not the same as when you have same-sex marriages, which I don't agree with. I don't approve. I never have. And when you have judges that are of that character, like, who are you to make the decision on these nature? Because they deem themselves, one of the other things too is judges deem themselves to be nonpartisan. That is the biggest corrupt statement that the judicial branch can make here in the state of California, is when they run for office, they implicate that they are a nonpartisan individual. Nonsense. Why? Because you're partisan to what? The Constitution. So you can't be a nonpartisan. This is why when people go to, say you get called in for jury duty, they sometimes have you fill out a questionnaire. That's illegal. It's an invasion of privacy. They have no right to ask you a single question. But what they do is they cherry pick.
Yes.
And when they cherry pick, well, that's also a form of jury tampering. you don't get to know those things. It's pick a number. You're the only thing they have everything to check on is to make sure that you're a lawful citizen. You were born here in the United States of America. You're a citizen of that state, and that's it. There's nothing else. Right? Or maybe you don't have any medical issues that you're not going to pass out during jury or whatever like that. And you've got all these, medicinal, purposes that you have to be taken care of. You're not going to be able to sit on that stand. So that's really about it. They don't get to ask you what your beliefs are. If you have family members that are in the military, are you racist? Do you have any, racist people in your family? Because I've been to, gone to jury duty and I've been asked these questions. That's called jury tampering.
I have been asked to as well.
Right? So there's so much corruption going on that we the people have been subjected to. We need somebody in office at the governor level to squash all this, because again, the governor can do a lot more than what most people think. The problem is a lot of your governors and a lot of your newly candidates who are planning to be your new representative are already bought and paid for under the contract by the amount of money that they've already taken from unions, lobbyists, corporatists, and Fortune 500s, right? This is how it works in rich families. And once you're under contract, you cannot negate that contract. It has to be fulfilled under the contract clause. The contract clause ensures that the states can't come up with a law to prevent the obligation of a contract. If that's the case, you're bound, and judges will take the Constitution and throw it out. It doesn't apply. And this happens all the way from, probate up to criminal. Like you're like, how does this work? Why are they able to do this? Because it's a little loophole inside the Constitution that judges and lawyers utilize to get their way. And same with legislators, right? So again, they draft this, but once you're under contract, that contract has to be fulfilled. So your governor or your newly assembly representative will do a 180 on you, because they are now bound to whoever it was that they made the agreement with, right? So they made an agreement with, a super PAC, right? A realtor PAC that's a super PAC, or these farmer unions and stuff like that. But they're not always for the people; they're for their own industry, and they're trying to ensure that legislation will go their way. And well, now I'm bought and paid for because they funded my campaign, because the contracts that come in say that if I take the money, then or it says I have to take the money if I'm going to get an endorsement, right? And it's written in so many different legalistic jargon, but basically it's a quid pro quo under contract. Yeah. And then you, the individual who's just trying to live their life, who unfortunately has maybe some sort of struggle, you get stuck, and you're the one who suffers you're basically the collateral damage.
There's a few, I don't know how much more of your time I have. I know we're approaching an hour. I have time if you have it. I'd like to run through maybe several different topics as fast as I can. And
yeah, no, I've got time. I cleared my schedule.
It's still, I respect your time. We'll still try to move along quickly. In fact, it's me to try to keep up with you and your answers. You know what you're talking about. You speak quickly, and I appreciate how much we're actually gratefully able to cover in a short amount of time. But I'm going to go over several things real quick. That way we can speed past some stuff, and then you can respond to what you'd like to. And then we finish up with I didn't do a proper introduction with you, and I'd like to bring up a couple of things that relate to you with that.
No problem.
The podcast interview, and I might put it at the front, but either way, we'll see. I did want to read past those, those long-term political goals you brought up. There's about 6 of them. Abolition of all monarchies and all ordered governments, abolition of private property and inheritances, abolition of patriotism and nationalism, abolition of family life and the institution of marriage, the establishment of communal education for children, and abolition of all religion. Those things are really scary. This comes from an older book dating back to describing dating back to Sabbateanism and beyond before the time of, the mention of the Illuminati and things like that. And it comes up in the Communist Manifesto and things, which is where it kind of brought up to me when you had mentioned it. And then moving into the Second Amendment and rights, and to relate it to fathers' experiences in the family court, and what I see as scary as an easy way to disarm American citizens is whether there's a crime or not, you can face a domestic violence restraining order in the family court, and that it will essentially remove your right to own any firearms immediately, and you have to forfeit them. And that can happen with false allegations in court, or even just simply saying that, the mothers typically will say that they're afraid of their partner or their ex-husband or the father of their children. I see that as something very scary that maybe we could hear a little bit of your thoughts on that. And then further to push down the road on that, those that have faced, like myself, misdemeanor. I forget the penal code 278.5, maybe in California, with it's a misdemeanor inflicting corporal injury on a spouse or a cohabitant. In my case, a false allegation. I was very afraid at 22 years old. I had no support. If I would have took it to trial, according to the police report and things like that, I probably would have been fine because of the situation itself. But I was scared. I wanted to go back to work. I was pressured to pay child support. I was pressured to not lose my relationship with my child. They tell you could face, several years in jail. And I ended up taking a plea to a no contest. And it's a travesty. I got it expunged. I have no other criminal record since. And this is almost 20 years ago. And so some fathers face, and it's a shock. I just spoke to one of my interviewees the other day about it. And he was kind of a shock to him that whether it's a felony or a misdemeanor, in state and federally, that you have a firearm ban for life, even if it's a misdemeanor. In California, it before 2019, you had a 10-year span that you could pass, and then you could have firearms again. But then that's still something that's frightening, because I would qualify for that still, but then it's still a federal issue. And I have a family, and a part of the introduction I wanted to bring up is you're a married man yourself. You have a wife. You have, it seems to be 3 kids.
Yes, I have 3 kids.
Beautiful children. And,
yes.
I saw a black belt around your shoulders in one of the pictures with them in jiu-jitsu.
Yes,
that's incredible. I saw a couple of stripes on there. I'm really impressed.
Yeah.
And I really don't see it as a shallow or surface level thing, but those are some things, especially anybody that's been on the mats before, to learn how to respect somebody or what type of people you'll find in these environments. I really like that about you. And you have a book published in 2024, Lucifer's Zenith: Corrupting Nature's God Through Government Deception. I just put that in my checkout cart this morning. I had missed that until I was going through a lot of your information. And that's one thing. If you could bring up a little bit of information on that. I know I'm throwing a lot at you quickly. One last thing in this little spiel of information here. And then, of course, I've got other topics on your policies I'd love to quickly go over before we lose you here today, before you leave us here today as well. One of the things that's very concerning in family court, we talk about an oath that sheriffs take, or even the deputies take, to protect and uphold the Constitution. And I see it is scary to me in there, as sheriffs aren't lawyers. Like you said, they're usually very young, especially when they're new. They're put in the court to sit through a lot of family court cases and criminal cases for several years before they even go out on the field. And it's scary that they're sitting next to us, U.S. citizens, right there, as we're getting our inalienable rights trampled and taken away, Second Amendment. And what I think, and I heard mentioned before, is the Eighth Amendment, the right against cruel and unusual punishment. I think that happens to the children and any parent that goes through it. I see parents as equal. The issue is that mostly it happens to fathers. And so I was curious on some of your thoughts there. And then I would just like to maybe breeze through, we talk as some of your first actions that you had taken in office, and the list of policies on your website that you're going to perform. This is very, relevant to, I think, all of us in family court, but then anyone who's interested in taking care of their land in general. Perform an investigation on criminal misconduct, to fiduciary delinquency, legislators engaging in egregious legislation, closing the border indefinitely, and protecting the children as far as trafficking and the risk of that also happens through the family court system and child protective services. So I know I threw a lot at you, but if some of that, anything comes to mind for some of that?
Yeah, I think, let's go back to, you had mentioned, as a parent, you had your gun rights taken away from you because of a complaint and something that was unsubstantiated. And a lot of the courts function under alleged, right? If you have been alleged to say or enact or do something without evidence, then you are, unfortunately, we live in a society where, we say you're innocent until proven guilty, but you're actually guilty until proven innocent. And one of the ways that this is, and a lot of people don't know to bring this up in the courts, is when you're in the courts, you always have to ensure that the Fifth Amendment is on your side. It was designed that way on purpose. This is why when they read you your Miranda rights, whenever you're detained, they'll do it when you're in a deposition, if something, because they need to make sure that what's transpiring. They're going to let you know you can no longer have such and whatever, so many firearms, devices, defensive tools, or whatever, right? So when they read you your Miranda rights, and I said this last week in Stockton, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of record or court of law. But you have to stop right there. They said that it can and will. Can and will what? Be used against you. They didn't say that whatever you say is going to be used for you. It's going to be used to guide you or to maintain your innocence. They say it's going to be used against you. So when you look at Miranda versus Arizona, it's basically all about rights being violated and not understanding their rights. And not everybody does understand the rights. So it was designed to ensure a level of protection so that the individual could have some form of representation. And that's why they presented that. But notice that they twisted it, though. When I say they, I mean the corrupting government, the legislators. They drafted it in such a way that when it set precedents, it was designed to really put the burden of responsibility of innocence on the actual person who's being detained. That's why they say they can and will. So that it can be used against you, and it will be used against you. So they're going to look for every evidence to separate, to divide, and to conquer in such a way that's not to your benefit, even if you're not the individual. They're not looking for justice. This is why I say, if you're in court, understand anytime you're sitting in front of a nisi prius court, which is an inferior court, meaning just in front of a judge, right? And you're not in front of your jury of your peers. That is an inferior court, and that is a court of equity. Those are problem courts. Those courts are not in alignment for you, the parent, or for somebody who is, because I've actually had to self-litigate, and we can get back into that afterwards. But when this happens, you always have to keep in mind that the courts are not there for you, and they're not there for justice. The law and justice are not synonymous. They're there for legal loopholes to ensure that somebody suffers the consequences under commercial activity. And you and we, the people, are there for justice, which is why you have a jury of your peers that's designed to be in an open public. It has to be public. Why? Because the court of public opinion sways strongly within government and moves government around. When they close it off, that's a problem. And that means there's no public eyes on there writing an opinion about it or reporting it to the people and making the community aware of what is unjust that is happening within the courts.
Can I
So
answer
again,
real quick, since
Yeah.
as you're on this topic, as far as jury of your peers being in there, and I've also faced, and I don't know if self-litigation is the right word, but representing myself or fathers, or they call it, like you said, it's not criminal, it's civil, or a quasi-criminal court when we're in there trying to enforce contempt. I had to file 220 counts in the year 2020, and I'm made to be the prosecutor. And if I want police there, I think I have to pay them to show up, especially if there's more than oftentimes 2 to 6 police officers involved in one event. And when we spread that over, I personally have had 20 to 40 events within a 2-year period before, which is very high conflict. Even, the stress of me getting in there. But as far as I asked, I said, how come we don't have a jury in here? And the judge, turned to my kid's mother, who's given a public defender, which basically is another one of the child appointed attorneys in the court. It's a part of the same system in there, and said, well, I don't think that they want a jury here, and they're probably going to waive that right. Is that correct? And they basically say, yeah. So, and like you said, you're closed off not only in the contempt court. Fathers are forced to be prosecutors, and then in my case, they pretty much told me, oh, you did it wrong, when it's very self-explanatory. The list that I had to follow and then go through the facilitator. Where
you went in as I think they call it as a pro se litigant, which basically means self-litigator. You're representing yourself. So it's pronounced pro se or whatever, or something like that.
Okay,
it's crazy because they put you at a disadvantage because that's a court edict. That's an edict of policy procedure. And those procedures aren't something that you're familiar with, which is why you're put at a disadvantage. Because who are you to defend yourself, even though it's a catch-22 where they kind of force you to go into that direction, and then they've already made their decision. This is why I tell people, stop right there. You're in a civil proceeding. If they're treating you like criminal, then you need to have a jury of your peers. End of story. The judge can tell you, not granted. That's not the judge's purview. So you can't, because then the fight then goes against the judge, who's then who needs to be benched, who also needs to have filings and complaints about their own criminal misconduct and abuse of authority. They don't actually have that authority under the Constitution. They cannot take the Constitution and throw it out either. That does not work. But if you don't know any better and you're not understanding this, then you basically engage in self-incrimination. You allow for them to have the will over you. That's where you have to stop. And that's where I tell people, that's where you stop talking and you stop saying things that are not in your favor and you're falling prey to court edicts. And when that happens, everything must stop at that time. You need a recess, you need an emergency session, then you have to file a complaint against the judge. Even if you can't get the judge removed, you got to start filing against the complaints and make it about the judge, because now the judge is not allowing for basically a fair trial in a civil proceeding. So again, family court is civil proceeding, and everybody forgets that. And this is one of the things that I've come across with a lot of parents, because they're like, wait a second, yeah, I'm being treated like a criminal. And why do I have to pay for everything? And yet I'm told to have a lawyer, but I can't afford one, but I'm pro se, so I have to self-litigate. And you're basically, it's a catch-22. And this is the part where we unfortunately have to become much more intelligent, because we're up against a machine. And that machine is not in your favor. It's in favor of, again, like you just read, you went and read that book of the Pillars of Abolition. And you just said this is a much older book and stuff. And where did these ideas come from? This is what the courts are currently structured as right now, is the separation. And they have all these subterfuge courts, right? You have vaccine courts. You've got family court, you got probate, you have criminal, you have cyber, you have all these different kinds of courts broken up. The problem is too, is each of these courts function differently and not necessarily in a way that's constitutionally sound. In other words, you got to go back to the 14th Amendment and the state constitution under equal protection of the laws, right? Equal protection. If you're being at a disadvantage, then you're not under equal protection. And equal protection means it has to be an even room under civil proceedings. But if it's becoming criminal, that's a problem now. Well, then you do have, and if there was any intention or any verbiage that stipulated for a trial, you should say yes. Right. And that's where, because again, now you have more minds hearing this, and it kind of isolates the judge. Now the judge becomes what? Sort of a tennis judge. Sustained, overruled, denied, right? It's at the end of the day, it's the trial jury that's going to decide. Once a trial jury decides, the judge can't overrule it. The judge can't overturn it. And there's never been, at least that I've not been able to find, I have not been able to dig up anything where a judge has overturned a trial jury. That's never happened. Okay. So if you can find it for me, because I don't see one. So that tells me that the trial jury is the final say. So if a trial jury says it's going to go this way, that's the way it's going to go. No judge can come back and say, well, I'm a judge, I'm going to overturn it. You can't, because under the Constitution, the people have the final say, because we the people are the fourth branch of government. And this has already been deemed by multiple Supreme Court judges. Justice Scalia, the late great Justice Scalia, I think he was probably one of our best originalists. I don't believe he suddenly died of natural causes. I think he was actually assassinated. But with that being said,
I've got his book. I look forward to reading that one.
He's got a few books that I study as well. One of my favorite ones that every parent should probably have, or at least start understanding, is Reading Law. And he co-wrote that book, and it's really good. It really breaks down, the way your judges look at things and the way the law looks at context in its writing and verbiage, right? This is why I tell people, when they change the language to change perception, and it subjects us under these dubious jurisdictions and allows courts and the judges this sort of latitude at their own discretion, that's not really the Constitution. It's their own personal discretion and biases. If that's the case, you need to understand how they think. And so when you pay attention to verbiage, right, the courts generally utilize the interpretations of words and phrases and the meaning of the word and phrase at the time it was first adopted for the highest level of context. If that's the case, then that's how they think. And so you have to understand, reading law, because again, this is what you're up against and how they think. It's tedious. You're going to put yourself through a lot of it's a tumultuous process, but unfortunately, the government is not there for you. They're there for themselves and their positions and self-preservation. They're not out for justice. That's That's we the people. So ensure that you go the route. I would rather at least go that route with a trial jury, and grand jury than anything else. Because again, a judge is bound to his own biases, whether they claim, that they are a neutral body of people. No, they're not, right? And they claim that they're nonpartisan. No, they're not, and they're not supposed to be. They have to be biased to the Constitution. So they have to ensure everything stays within that confines. Once they go outside of it and they're in their own sort of like special court, right? Like the Office of Special Masters deals in vaccines. That's a court that's been created in order to determine whether or not somebody's been injured by a vaccine or lack thereof, right? Because some doctors say, well, you have to have it. And then parents are in a separation battle because one parent didn't want to inject their kid with some poison, the other parent wanted to. And then it goes to the Office of Special Masters, and then they'll determine whether or not there's been some sort of injury that the money comes out of a trust that the taxpayers pay on. And it's like, so it's sort of an outside court
Yeah,
outside of the courts.
that was completely bypassed. Like in mine, I had legal rights, but I didn't really have them. I tried to make a message across, through the parenting app. Hey, I don't want to have my child have this vaccine. I never got an answer from the court or the other parent. It was completely looked over, and I don't even know to this day. My oldest child I have not seen for 7 years. I had some contact for a while, text messaging. I had the police come to my house, and then about October, after so many years without drama, they ended up sending me a letter saying they're sorry from Internal Affairs about their lack of performance, unsatisfactory performance. So they don't want to self-incriminate, but yeah, and I really appreciate all this information. It's going to be super helpful for any fathers watching this. I almost feel like I'm taking advantage hearing so much information about helping in family court, and I greatly appreciate it. But I really respect your time, and I
Yeah,
also
no, don't worry about it. I'm good.
thank you.
Today
It's
I'm just
so
focusing
helpful.
on I'm actually tomorrow we have a town hall in Orange
Town
County and Lake.
Town hall,
Uh,
yeah, May 1st. I'm sure I write this down. Yeah.
yeah, it's I think around what is it, 5 or 6 o'clock till about 8 p.m. It's about a 3-hour event. Some of the other gubernatorial candidates are coming, like Louis Herms, I believe Elaine Colati, both really great individuals. I think two board of supervisors. I think Greta Solozarno, she's also a Republican candidate. I think they asked for a few other Democrats candidates, but they declined to come. What does that tell you?
Right.
And I think there's already maybe 60 people that have already RSVP'd to show up. So, we're looking at a pretty good crowd of people that, are really, and I know a lot of people don't want other people to know that they're enduring some of these hardships. But that's what this kind of town hall is about. It's not really a forum per se, but it's really more about a discussion that, maybe some of these candidates can offer up. It's not just, hey, here I am, I'm pining for your vote. I've been at this for 7 years. June will be the 7-year mark when the final day to come and vote
As you
in the
said, a
prime.
number of completion, and I think this is really a good time for you.
Yeah, there really is. I'm pretty tired. Like I said, I've given out over 1,500 free copies of my book because it's not really about the money. It's always been about the fight and helping people educate themselves. For me, it actually sparked when I told you that I self-litigated. I was being accused of tax evasion, and I didn't understand. I got a letter in the mail from the IRS and from the state California French tax franchise board, and I didn't understand that I was being subjected to I was going to be subjected to, I think it was like 10 years in prison, or I was going to have to pay like a very hefty fee. It was like over 100,000 some odd dollars, and I was like, I don't have $100,000. What do you mean tax evasion? How did this happen? I don't even make that at that time. This was gosh, I want to say 17 years ago, and I said I've always paid my taxes. So I got all my taxes together, and I was getting information that I was requesting from the courts, and there was a little I finally got a little context, and it had listed out areas of jobs that I had worked that I never worked. And I realized at that moment, I think I'm suffering from identity theft. And when I wrote that information back to the courts, they said I was going to have to justify that. Otherwise, I was still subject to the consequences of paying the fee or having so many years in prison, in the state prison. And I thought, okay, so I had to go out, and I was given about 3 months to gather up as much evidence as I possibly could. to prove that I was not the one working those jobs. And when I put all the years together and I put it all on a timeline, I got all the documents and taxes to align, right? I took everything down. I literally broke it down in as well as I could to show a proper timeline. It came down to me standing in front of the judge. I was in this very, very small courtroom. It almost looked like a classroom with a podium, but it was a courtroom. And I went in there, and there was the DA, city DA or whatever, and then or at least somebody from the office. And I sat down, and it came down to my evidence that proved that I lived in San Diego and I was going to college, and I was working on campus at the time that there was this one person working under my name at another job at the same time here in Los Angeles. And so when I showed the timeline and I was done after that, the judge took the gavel and hammered down and said dismissed and walked out.
Good.
But I was in there for like 20 minutes, displaying everything. But the DA was, made their presentations, such, Mr. Mercuri, if he doesn't pay such and this, we have evidence of X, Y, and Z. Like, it was very formal and kind of scary because there was a bailiff in the room, ready to handcuff me. And, again, I can see where the intimidation would come into play, where people would be like, it's not me, Your Honor. But if you don't present evidence, if you don't fight in that way, the courts will take advantage of you, irrelevant if you're innocent or not.
Yeah.
They don't care. That somebody's going to pay for it because there's profit to be made on your misery because of the amount of money that is made when you go to prison.
Yeah.
And that's something that we all need to understand. So that's where I learned, how to start speaking when it comes to, talking to lawyers, judges, when you present yourself in a court of record or a nisi prius court, which means to first whatever. What is it? First agree or whatever. It basically means if you don't, if a judge says all rise and everybody stands, well, then you've succumbed to, to that agreement,
Wow.
right? You're subjecting yourself. These are little things and traits that you have to do that courts don't like and will threaten you. But once you become a little more educated, then you'll learn how to fight. And the last thing that I want to say too is for parents is to always utilize that Fifth Amendment. So in other words, if you look at there was a previous bill, it was AB 957, and AB 597 was denied by Governor Gavin Newsom. He didn't sign it into law. He said no to it. But AB 957 was a bill that would solidify legislatively state codes that we already have in the books, which is why it didn't matter. But it basically stipulated that if one parent did not agree to their child's or affirm their child's transgenderism, ideology, or fluidity, then that parent would lose custody, and the child would be subjected to the other parent who was in support of transgender ideology, fluidity, and so on. If that was the case, then the parent needed to use the Fifth Amendment, because under the Fifth Amendment, your right to be silent or not answer is not an indication of any form of agreement, right? It's not, you're not self-incriminating on any level. And because it's civil, they can't utilize that as your silence being an agreement, an affirmation, or a denial. It's neither.
Wow.
And so when you're not affirming transgenderism and you're not denying transgenderism, you're simply remaining neutral. The courts then have to adhere back to traditional family court codes, and those codes that would subject that parent is now relinquished because that parent was smart enough not to answer. I'm not required to answer. You're not demanded to answer, and it's not an indication of guilt or an admission of anything else or non-admission. You just chose not to answer. That's the power of that Fifth Amendment. So the judge then is forced to have to adhere back to older court codes that would simply be between two parents who are just looking to try to figure who's going to have, a certain amount of time of custody. End of story. Because one parent said, well, I'm not going to answer to that. I'm not required to. And the courts can't compel a parent to answer something that is a determination either or. Because then they would be criminalizing you, and they're not going to go that far to do that because, again, the Fifth Amendment applies.
That is
They're gonna be
absolutely
subject-
brilliant. I'm so thankful to be able to hear this, and I know for sure that's going to help others. The interview I had just before yours, I already have a few more to publish after we do this one that I've just done. But Adam Vina here in California, who is going to be at the event tomorrow. So when I publish this, I aim to do it Friday morning, May 1st. And over time, the views here will spread with this one, but on the same day, that's when we were talking about Sun and Sail Club, Lake Forest, California, covering family court, probate, juvenile, and CPS issues with a lot of other guests there. That brings me, it brings me to back to some of the police reform and the policies you're looking for there. One of them is it's a little bit of a relational issue here, but I have a kind of a question on your thoughts on it.
Yeah.
Removal and preventing the allowance for disciplinary police officers to transfer
Yeah.
from precinct to precinct, which is very dangerous, I'm sure. And then what I noticed, what I could not believe when I was looking at, okay, lifetime ban for firearms that, you know, fathers and regular citizens have to face that can't even afford a place to live, and they're part of the homelessness issue. It would easily connect there. But when a police officer is accused of domestic violence, I noticed, I asked, well, what happens? How do these guys keep their jobs? And an assistant chief of police here, I guess, tried to sue the city because their own medicine was used against them. And I don't mean to demonize them. It's very much both. I want to support them. I agree with you to not defund them, but also accountability is important. And so the police officers are actually able to plea down to another crime that has nothing to do with domestic violence. So they are able to not only keep their firearms or Second Amendment rights, but they keep their job.
Yeah.
And then probably it can get into something where they go in after disciplinary action like that, they may transfer, you know, and so and bringing in also into your police reform is extra training. You even mentioned jujitsu in there. Specific job training, continuance of training. I know I'm not using the exact words, but I'm trying to keep good for time here. And one of those.
Well, let me go back to your let me go back to your lifetime ban. So lifetime ban is illegal, and the reason why I say that is because when you look at the Constitution, if there was a crime, right, there has to be a crime. In order for there to be a crime, right, there has to be an injured party, which means you have every right to file against this lifetime ban. Why? Because all crime, right, has to have an injured party. Was there an injured party? No. If there was no injured party, then subjugation of a theory, right, is illegal. You can't sit there and you know, subject somebody to something that was a claim that was alleged with no evidence, and therefore putting you on a lifetime ban is illegal. But because you haven't pursued it in that direction, right, then it's egregious and it has to be thrown out. So therefore, you've committed no crime with a gun.
And just to add on that, which was very interesting as far as your potential position here to become the next governor of California is, in some of my research, I look, well, how is there any way you could fix this? And you can actually, it looks odd for a felony. You still have to go through the court or notify the court, but down for the misdemeanor, which would be lower, the rules were, as far as I understand, to go straight to the governor for a request for a pardon. And I thought, well, I'm in California, I'll be screwed, you know, even though it's been 20 years, I have no other criminal record, and Newsom's there. Then I would like to cover briefly, if we have time, Bianco, and what you exposed on your YouTube channel in a very short clip that has to do with illegal immigration was amazing. It really exposed what I think all the Republicans should see as far as his beliefs. But yeah, the pardon from a governor is like what looks to be, other than what you just mentioned, the only thing I could find is a shot in the dark at getting gun rights back.
Yeah, you would have to go back through the legal process in suing, you know, or appealing that. But the appeal, you would have to go through a different route though, because again, it's a Second Amendment right. And when a court determines something without any there to be a crime, then they're stuck because they have to justify a crime. They have to justify the crime because you're asking. So again, whenever you stand in front of a judge, say it's go in front of a traffic court judge, and you say, well, who's the injured party? Right? Nobody swayed, no car moved out of the way. You didn't inhibit any. There was nobody on the road. There's no crime. And that's actually already been ruled by the Supreme Court that if there is no crime, then the government cannot be the injured party.
Okay.
And in this instance, it is the court or the court findings that government and your inability to follow certain codes, that whether you're aware of it or not, are not the injured party. They can't be the injured party. So once you learn that, then you have standing. But standing is again, you have to make sure, like I said, you got to have your ducks in order. You have to have a timeline of events, and you have to have proof. And once you show that proof in the appeal process, you know, and then you have standing, because they're going to have a difficult time denying you your rights. And then you pretty much, again, your gun rights. It's just like somebody who committed a felony with a gun. Maybe they never fired it. They held up a gun store. They were drunk or whatever. We see all these cases all the time. If that individual has served 10 years, right, or say they served and they got out after 5, with good behavior, and then they got through their probation period, right? They were on probation, say for whatever 3 to 5 years. After their time, they're done. There's nothing in the Constitution that says they can't have their gun rights back. Why? Because it's a right. So they have every right to own a gun, especially to protect their own property, and that's their property. And this is you have a right to. So what they're doing is they're splitting hairs. So you can't defend your home with a firearm. So you'd have to use a bat, a knife, or some other projectile, right? No, it's again. So this is where the splitting of hairs comes in. That is egregious. So under my administration, this is why I tell people: once you served your time, you served 5 years. You were sentenced to 10. You served 5. You were on probation for another 3 and 5. You've not committed the crime. You've shown your community that you don't have a propensity for committing more criminal acts. You have every right to get back on rights. You're going to go through the Fire Bureau of Investigation of background checks. You've not committed a crime after so many years. You have the right to gain back your ability to defend yourself, right? The right to keep and bear arms. And a lot of people don't know too is that again, when you have firearms, when you go purchase from a gun seller in California or any other state or whatever, that's a firearm, but you still have a right to have an arm. And this is the part that people don't know, which is where you obtain that arm from a gun show, which is why they keep talking about corrupt government keeps talking about trying to close the legal loophole. What's the loophole? Arm. They don't tell you that. And that arm is from a gun show. So if you make a purchase for an arm from a gun show and it's in your home, you still have the authority to have that because it's not a firearm. They'll consider that, but that's not what you're using it for. You're using it for self-defense.
Right.
And again, it's splitting of the hairs under 2 different jurisdictions. You have to understand this.
Yeah.
And this is where, again, if you don't play your cards right, you get screwed over. You play it right, there's nothing they can do about it.
Right.
So for you, again, this is one of those things where I would go down that path
Yeah.
just to see where it takes you. It won't be easy. They're going to throw all kinds of things at you, but
Right.
you'd be surprised once you start fighting back.
There's
You
many
kind of-
more, that's why I want to push the viewership here for these interviews for especially fathers, because it's so much a copy paste system, and it is scary when I look at, okay, they're trying to get rid of the family, you get the protector out of the home, the fathers, and you can disarm them very easily, and
Yeah.
all these things that leads to homelessness, and it leads to fathers being in jails and prisons.
Well, I got my guns taken away from me. I have several guns. I always tell people, listen, I was an honorably discharged naval veteran. I did combat search and rescue. I was a rescue swimmer. I did 2
Black
tours,
Knight
3 ops.
in the Navy.
Yeah, Black Knight. Yeah, I was a Black Knight with helicopter squadron 4. I was trained in the 50 cal, the M240, the M60, the M16, the 9mm, and so on, right? So I'm familiar with guns, but I cooperated, and they had asked me if there was any more guns in the house, and I said yes. And they said, well, can you tell us where they are? And I said, I don't need to. And they said, that's true, but we're just for safety measures. And I said I'm going to cooperate, so it's on record that I'm cooperating. I will get my guns back. And they kind of smirked at me.
Mhm.
Well, after 3 weeks, I could file my petition to get my guns back. So I did. I went and I purposely did it because I wanted to see, the difficulty behind this, because some people never got their guns back. They purposely make it difficult because if you don't file your paperwork process the right way, right, they won't give it back to you. Number 2, they don't always write down the serial numbers correctly, so you better have those like around the home. And we found that on their report, they didn't file the correct serial numbers on the gun. So we had to go back into our records so that we could ensure that we had the right serial numbers for each of the guns that they took.
Mhm.
And they don't give you back your bullets. They give you back they take all the bullets out and they throw them away, or they destroy them. But they'll give you back your magazines, right? And so you have to make sure how many magazines they actually took. And so I kept data on all this, again, record. And so when we filed out the forms, we got, we went through each gun at a different time, and they were upset. In fact, when we called the detective would not answer back, but he had said, oh yeah, shouldn't be a problem to get your gun back or whatever, and your other guns that we had confiscated. And then when we filed back, we said, you guys had misfiled the numbers. He didn't want to call back, but we had found all the numbers.
Mhm.
And so one of the officers that was handling holdings, they were kind of frustrated because they were like, "Oh, so you're getting your guns back?" It was like they were upset that I filed all the paperwork the right way,
Exactly. Yeah.
and so I got every single weapon back. I got all my magazines back,
Glad to hear
and
it.
I bought a bunch of more guns anyway.
I'm glad to hear
So
it. Yeah.
you have to, again, you have to learn how to have one foot in and one foot out, and it's not an easy process. It was very tedious. It took about 6 months, but in that 6 month time frame, I immediately went and got more guns just so that my home was still covered. I wasn't, I'm not ignorant to how they mistreat people. They always treat you like the criminal, right? I've always said this. They criminalize the victim and they victimize the criminal. This is the society that we live in right now.
Absolutely. And this has been extremely educational. I'll keep sharing this, and I'm sure it's gonna get in front of more and more eyes as this platform itself continues to grow. And so then looking over as far as you taking over the administration here and your policies your website is extremely well organized, and there's a whole link with
Thank you.
with a list of your policies. You go over 17. It's very clear and concise and short and to the point. And
Let me tell people this too, if you
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
mind. I'll tell your
I don't
audience
mind.
when you get
No,
to.
please.
I always tell people too, listen, uh, there are a lot of voter guide information that goes out as to what a candidate and how the candidate answers those questions. I've actually only answered maybe throughout, again, I've campaigned in 2019 for Congress. I immediately about a month later set out for the 2022, but for the governor seat, and then the recall took off. So I made the ballot for the 2021, continued on to the 2022 because Gavin wasn't unseated. Gavin won again. And so then I set out in November, it's time stamped on my Facebook to this 2026. So I've been at this now, like I said, for 7 years.
Uh-huh.
There's some information that floats out there that says that I said things that I never wrote, that I never filled out, but yet it's there.
Yeah.
And so I tell people, if there's a contradiction in something that supposedly I said, go to my website. My
Yeah.
website has been nearly consistent, and if anything, I've reaffirmed it since 2019. I haven't changed anything, so I just simply changed from me running for Congress to me running for governor.
Mhm.
And I've only increased my policies and I've refined my policies, but in the same direction. So in other words, if I've always been against red flag gun laws, I've merely increased my policies as to what else I'm going to do to ensure that people maintain the rights of their ownership, whether they've committed a crime or not, right? They're still going to get under my administration. You're going to get your guns back. You've already served time, right? Like I just said, I have videos of this. So I just tell people, if it's somewhere else, but it doesn't align, go to my website. That's I want to be held accountable to the things that I say in an interview and the things that I also write it down so that there's sort of a double whammy there. So I'm always, this is why people are like, wait, but you said in this on this voter guide, I never filled that out. Somebody else did.
Okay. That's extremely important. I'm glad that we got to cover that. And yeah, the website is absolutely incredible. There's as well as contact information, merchandise that helps, donations, and then volunteering to help be a part of the team. And under your YouTube, a couple of the clips and stuff that I saw there, as far as the rest of your policies, legal immigration has been a very, big issue
Yeah.
across the news and across the board. And typically I think I will tell you, and I'm very honest and transparent about it, very uneducated level, inexperienced, and at a basic level was seeing anybody who feels that they may be conservative or following the Republican Party. I was actually shocked to see in the short video on your YouTube talk with you and the Sheriff Bianco answering questions about whose role it is to enforce against illegal immigration or illegal aliens, and his answer was basically that's the role of the federal government. I think, and you can correct me, and then and his follow-up on that was actually shocking to me. I thought, wow, this doesn't really align with all of the complaints we see from conservatives saying that they want to protect their borders, and they don't mind if there's people that came from Mexico that are here. They just want a protected border. My wife's family is from Nayarit, Mexico. She was born here, but they have a Mexican heritage and background. And then your answer goes right back to the Constitution, and then you can clear this up. But You mentioned Marbury versus Madison. I think this is along the same notes I took here. Title 8, Section 1325. Sanctuary laws are violating the oath of office and can be prosecuted.
Yes. So, yeah, I've actually, so there, I have more videos. If you go on, I haven't updated my YouTube nearly as much as I have with my Instagram, my TikTok, and my X account. But there's a ton of videos, more so on my Facebook. In fact, Facebook probably has the most videos, along with Instagram. You'll find more videos with me breaking down Chad Bianco, Steve Hilton, kind of exposing their hypocrisy. And then, of course, the debate between me and Steve Hilton on abortions. And yes, Sheriff Chad Bianco, where he talks about amnesty. I broke, he says a pathway to citizenry, but that's really where the definition kind of stems from. When we talk about amnesty, we're talking about a pathway to citizenry, and he's talking about the individuals that have already lived here. In fact, he was in an interview recently where he tells people, as to no avail, these people who have lived here, have been trying to get their citizenry, but it's the system is broken and it's too slow and stuff. Listen, under the Constitution, we are not required to be expeditious on anybody who's trying to become a citizen here lawfully. It's not our requirement. We're not needed or demanded. In fact, it should take 5 to 10 years to come here. How bad do you want to become an American, right? We are not owed anybody in the world anything, right? We consume 35% of the world's gross economy. We owe nothing to no one. And we go out there and we try to police other nations, which we really shouldn't do. And so if you're going to come here legally, lawfully, going through our designated points of entry. If you bypass our designated points of entry, which we have, then you'll go through the process. Now, is it long? Is it tedious? Of course, it's not designed to be easy. And when he says this, he says, well, we got to work for a pathway. To who exactly? Because a lot of people overstay their visa. If you overstay your visa and you got that legally, God bless you. But once it's done, and if you can't reaffirm it and you can't get an update to your visa or anything else, you have to go back. Mm-hmm. It might suck, but again, America and taxpayers are not owed you anything. Mm-hmm. So once that visa is up, you are required by our laws to return to the country of origin. But Sheriff Bianco wants to ensure that these people have a quicker way of pathway to citizenry and knocks on Steve Hilton, who had the money and the finances to put himself through more expeditiously. I hate to tell you this, but if that was fortune favored him because of his ability to finance a more expeditious manner and getting a citizenry, God bless him. That's not illegal, right? So he didn't overstay anything. He went through the legal process. He was able to afford it to expedite his citizenry. That's good for him. If somebody else can't do it and they have to wait, lawfully they have to leave. Mm-hmm. And then how do you determine who's going to get that citizenry under the pathway of citizenship that he's talking about, which is another form of saying amnesty, without detainment? If you can't do it, you have to detain these individuals. But if you're going to open up the doors and simply just add for the floodgates so that everybody who's here, without actually proper investigating their background, ensuring that they're not part of some sort of criminal enterprise or the cartel, or they came here, fleeing their country because they committed some sort of heinous act of depravity in that nation, then you're perpetuating the same problem we've had for decades that go all the way back to President Ronald Reagan, who started off with the Immigration Reform Act of 1986. Ever since then, we had another Reform Act in 97. We had another one in 2000. We had another one in 2012. We've had a few, we've got a ton of work programs for people to come here to work legally and lawfully through corporations. So what are we missing here? Mm-hmm. That is basically what Chad Bianco is doing. The sheriff is pandering to the illegal votes or to the Hispanic community, which they are the majority in the state of California, that play this sort of sensitivity negotiation that we should really, they're good people. Which ones? You can't determine which ones. Yeah. Your neighbors, right? There's no way to do this except by detainment. So when he says, "Oh, I don't stand for sanctuary laws," there's a problem with that, because in one breath he says, "I fought against Gavin Newsom," And I fought against Gavin Newsom's against the vaccines and the vaccine mandates and shutting down my businesses in my county. I didn't do it. So in other words, he stood against an egregious legislation and an egregious executive order at the governor's level.
Mhm.
What gave him the authority to do that? He's the sheriff. And he did exactly what a sheriff should do, that whenever there's egregious legislation or an egregious executive order that is not constitutional, it is within his purview not to execute.
Yes.
And he pushed back. But then he turns around and he tells everybody, but under SB 54, my hands are tied. I can't do anything. The law says that we have to allow for these illegal aliens and that we can't call ICE. Now, we cooperate with ICE, but under these misdemeanors, we're not permitted to, under any investigation, to call ICE with somebody who's here illegally, right? It's the sole responsibility of ICE agents. No, it's not. When you look at the 9th and 10th Amendment, right, that is the enumerated powers or the powers not delegated, right, are left up to the state and or the people, right? It always ends with the people. If that's the case, then the states have the authority to push back against the federal government when the federal government fails to perform their duties. So under the Biden administration, it was a floodgate, and illegal aliens came into our nation at an invasion level.
Mhm.
When that happens, it's called an invasion. That follows under military jurisdiction. Then your local authorities in the state and the state militia are demanded by their oath of office to institute detainment. And then they have to repatriate these individuals. So under his oath, he's determined and he's demanded to actually enforce the Constitution. Why? When you look at the oath of office, it says what? I do solemnly swear to affirm and uphold the Constitution of the United States first, then the state constitution is second in that sentence, right? Just go to Article 20, Section 3 of the California State Constitution. It's right there in the first paragraph. Why do you say that first? Because your oath is demanded to ensure that you uphold the supremacy clause, the supreme law of the land. So it doesn't matter that it's the sole purpose of ICE. It's also demanded that wherever the federal government fails to perform their duties, the state has to fulfill it. If the state passes egregious legislation that he's admitted is illegal, sanctuary laws, then why did you fight against Gavin Newsom against the mandates, but you chose not to when it came to illegal alien? His argument is, like he said in that video, and he said in another video that I have where I break down his amnesty and I'm on stage with him and Steve Hilton, that he can't have a woman who was raped be afraid to call 911 because she's going to be deported. I got news for you. Yes, you should investigate that horrendous act. But if she's also found to be an illegal, she's not awarded to stay in the state. She's awarded to still be repatriated to her country of origin. Now, under the circumstances, you can try to negotiate something that's more of a safety protocol to ensure she's going to be safe. But again, she should have never been here in the first place, nor the criminal that maybe potentially was of the same community, because he also affirms that he knows where all the illegal aliens are at. And that they noticed a drastic decline in phone calls for services, meaning people weren't calling 911. That's a mute argument, and that is appeal to pity. And so it's a violation when you look at the United States Constitution. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 is called the Uniform Rule of Naturalization. That's what our title United States codes are based off of, most of them, that are in agreement with the Constitution, that create statutes that align more so in these codes to ensure that enforcement of naturalization is enforced. Now I'm going to go one step further. When you look at the 14th Amendment, a lot of people say, well, they're awarded due process. No, they're not. Illegal aliens are not. In fact, the court systems, when it comes to immigration courts, do not fall under the judicial branch. They fall under the executive branch. Why? Because when somebody comes here illegally, they're known as an invader. That falls under military jurisdiction because you're an invader and you're not supposed to be here, and you're utilizing our resources. And if you use our resources, you're stealing from the people in addition to that. And when they say, oh, they pay taxes, not really, because when they're under a lower tax bracket, which most of them are, they have been known to these illegals have taken not only their money back when they file taxes, they get more back as well because they're under a lower tax bracket.
Wow.
And when that happens, they take the money and they send it back to the cartel and to their country of origin. They don't reinvest it into our communities. They reinvest it back into their country of origin. So that means they have no loyalty to our country. They're taking our resources and therefore is an invader who has infiltrated our resources. That's illegal. And so when you look at the 14th Amendment, it says that all persons, and this is where everybody stops, all persons, fall under the jurisdiction. No, it says all persons born or naturalized. What's naturalized? The uniform rule of naturalization goes back to the Constitution, right?
Okay.
14th Amendment, all persons born, that means jus soil, you were born here with parents who are legally, lawfully, legal residents, or they too were also born here. You have jus soil, or you came here legally through our designated points of entry, and you are now naturalized. So all persons born or naturalized, comma, there's an injunction there, and to the jurisdiction thereof, to the jurisdiction thereof, right? What does that mean? It means that if you came here from Germany and you and your wife, she's pregnant and you went to go to Disneyland because you wanted a vacation and you gave birth, your child doesn't have jus soil under the jurisdiction thereof. The jurisdiction thereof is pertaining to where you naturally are from. That's your jurisdiction. That means Germany is your jurisdiction. To the jurisdiction thereof are then citizens of the United States. See how that works? It's so simple when you break this down. So when Chad Bianco decides not to do one but enforces another, or doesn't enforce one and ignores another, like he's basically engaging in what's called what let me see here. My brain just froze up. He's engaging in selective law enforcement.
Okay.
You can't do that. So he's in violation of his oath of office because he's selectively choosing what he's going to enforce and what he's not chose to. Where he fights back against the governor against egregious executive orders and legislation and mandates and regulations, and then where he chooses under the law and he says, well, I can't do it. So that's called selective law enforcement. That's a violation. He knows this, but he knows you don't know this. And somebody like me, he's not going to want to be on stage with me anymore because he already was, and I've broken this down before, and he doesn't like debates with me. So this is how this works. And this is why a lot of people are like, why isn't Daniel on the mainstream media? Because the mainstream media actually told me and a couple of other candidates, Louis Herms, Elaine Colati, they denied us. The board of Fox, the board of ABC, CBS, NBC, and the general managers literally told my campaign they weren't going to let us on the stage, even though, and we weren't supposed to know about it. But under the FEC's violation, they have to provide equal airtime. Well, they got airtime. So then we said, well, then we want to host our own debate, and we're going to have a facilitator group do that, and we're going to pay for it because we have donors who are willing to pay whatever amount is and whatever you charge them. And the board came back and they said no, even though they know it's an FEC violation and they know we can pay for it. They said they're not going to let us do it. We have to go the legal route. And they know that by the time we get done with the legal route, the primary is over with.
Wow.
Oh well, they're not going to undo and restart a new election. It's not going to happen. So this is why people go, well, I haven't seen Daniel. This is why I've been boots on the ground for years, is because it's the only way that I could figure out how to get around and get my popularity at the grassroots level that might pull up an upset. Yeah. And the reason why I say that is because there's now 7 million independent NPP. NPP means no party preference, independence. And if we are now 7 million, the Republican Party is only 5.3. They shrunk. Yes. And the Democrats have been stagnant for the last 4 election cycles. Historically, you can go back and go online. You can look at the record at the SOS. They've always hovered around 10.2, 10.3. Okay. Why have the independents increased? Because people are tired of both parties. They don't believe the polls. Polls are lies. And one, Chad's winning one, and then all of a sudden Steve's winning one. It's like, well, who's right? The Emerson College determined who was going to be on stage based off of, oh, look, let's pick 5 candidates and see who wants who, but they left out everybody else. Why? Because we didn't choose to be bought by the establishment and take their money under their donorship. And the news media, the mainstream media knows this because they're in lockstep with particular unions and parties and other corporatists. So they blocked us because, well, we're not part of the establishment.
And I think
people fall for that.
People fall for it.
Yeah.
And people need to hear from you as you're explaining it. They're denying you airtime, and it's the boots on the ground. And I was looking at some of the meta rules for advertising and things like that, which I think you should be clear. But you need donations, you need volunteers, you just need people to be aware. And I'm glad that even if it's a small part, I can help share. And I'm really happy to be able to ask you some of these questions. And you spent so much
Absolutely.
time with us today. Um, and maybe just really shortly, part of me too, as far as my own technical abilities, I might be reaching a limit as far as what my storage will be able to save here, because I notice better quality if I save it like to my platform here rather than what I'm using for Zoom in the cloud there, because I think it comes out to a better video, and this is a very important one. But I looked at it's covered on, of course, your website and in a few brief places on YouTube. And again, you said Instagram, TikTok, Facebook has a lot more video information of you, which helps people a lot to get through information faster. Now, abortions, and you had what seemed like kind of a debate with Steve Hilton, who's actually back and forth. He said something about that's decided by the people, but then he went backwards and said it's kind of decided by the court. And then you brought up the important fact, you go back to the constitutions again about the right to life with the laws of nature. Declaration of Independence is the job of the government to ensure right to life, and it's the supreme law of the land. And then again, that's where I put a note specifically about public nullification to egregious and repugnant law, and again where they use the working the language, and then I'll add on here too, maybe so we could get a kind of a brief answer, or as long as you'd like. I'm not exactly too worried about losing the storage here, but you are welcome to as much time as you'd like. Child sex trafficking is very huge, and especially among those that's why I see as like people who have traditional or conservative values are kind of being tricked into following into the party of the side of the Republicans, which is, like you said, is making people unhappy. Even ones that have been diehard for Trump and everything, that real American patriotism and caring for each other tends to fall back with someone I would relate to and appreciate learning so much, and watching the knowledge come out of you as a person like you, a candidate like you, who I wish the utmost success in the future. And I will be going to put my vote in for child sex trafficking, but they're trying to normalize pedophilia. There's profits to be made for them. They're trying to destroy the traditional family. Some of
Well,
those
and
profits are very
it begs the question, why do we have so many laws that protect the predator?
Yeah.
And when you look at Senator Scott Wiener's bill, SB 145, SB 145, it normalized the sex offender registration to 10 years. That his argument that he posted up on Twitter at the time before it became X, and I have a copy of and screen grabbed what he wrote. Basically, his argument was that it was unjust and unfair that if a straight male engaged in a sexual criminal act with, say, a 13-year-old, and the male was, say, 23, 24 years old, if he impregnated her, he doesn't have to register as a sex offender because it was done in a natural mannerism. In other words, he penetrated her sexually, physically through XXXY chromosomes, the way a male and a female consummate. But under our state laws, it's not fair that if a male engages who's gay with a 13-year-old male through sodomy, that male has to register as a sex offender if he's investigated and he's criminally charged. Well, that's not fair, is what his argument was. And so he said, it should be the same as a straight male, that they shouldn't have to register as a sex offender from if it's 10 years and over, right? So if it's a 25-year-old and or if it's a 20 or under, right? So if it's 10 years and under. So if it's a 22-year-old and a 15-year-old, and it was there was sodomy, our state laws say that you go to prison, and it's a more of a heinous crime and illegal, because that's not proper consummation the way our laws were written. So he leveled it out to ensure that they wouldn't have to register. I'm fully against that. Here's the reason. If he had leveled it out and said, hey, listen, it's if a gay male who has sodomy with a minor, whether it was, whether the minor said, was for it or against it, whatever, or they were groomed into it, it's irrelevant. If the male adult who has sodomy with, say, a 13-year-old, has to register a sex offender, so must also a heterosexual who has intercourse with a female minor. I would have been all for that. I would have said, yeah, I don't agree with that. Why would a heterosexual who's 23-year-old having sex with a 13-year-old and then they don't have to register sex offender? It's a minor. So he leveled that out and flipped it and said, well, they shouldn't have to register either. So now it's permitted. So because they're gay, and the only way for a gay male to, basically have an orgasm is anally, because they're not attracted to females.
Yeah.
How sick is that individual, and how disruptive and putrid that law is?
Yeah.
This is what we've got.
Yeah.
And then we wonder why the corrupting government, why they perpetuate laws that protect these predators who are out there selling children, trafficking children. And mind you, they're not just trafficking children into our state. We are trafficking children out of our state. So when I say I'm going to put a moratorium on our borders, that's not just a moratorium as to what's coming into our borders. It's also a moratorium as to what's going out, because we need to make sure that everything that's going out, whether it's a shipping container or shipping containers at our docks, San Francisco Bay, whatever, Los Angeles, the northern borders, everything that goes out, we need to make sure. And we need to investigate every single container and every truck and every ship that's coming in and going out, so that we can prevent this. Because again, our children, what is the point of passing down, again, the blessings of liberty to our posterity if we're not going to protect them? And if we're not going to protect them, then what kind of future do we have? We don't. And that is the purpose of this corrupt regime that is absolutely destroying the family and over sexualizing our children purposely, because these are sick individuals.
Yes. As you said, passing on our prosperity to our posterity. Right?
Yeah.
Got you. There are other policies on the website for anybody that sees this. It goes through 17 taxes, gun laws, child sex trafficking, police reform, homelessness, climate change, healthcare, vaccinations, abortions, illegal aliens, education is a huge one. Social media, medical board, California veterans, farmers and water, electricity, blackouts, voter ID. One of the things I seen on stopveteransuicide.org was, I got it on a different page here, that 48% more veteran suicide comes from those that didn't experience deployment, which is really wild to me. And I don't know about making the connections, but what scares me about that is these people serving their country and realizing possibly through family court system how easy it is to lose your house, your income, and most important of all, your access to your children, which, I think that a lot of the suicide comes from, veteran or not, would be lack of access to children. So you see that, in the father's experience of the family court and realm, and even child trafficking becomes a big danger that when fathers are removed from the kids' lives, and I'm not just pointing at single mothers, but the ability for kids to be abducted when they don't have their protectors around them, and the kids aren't learning as much as they would from their father that's teaching them traditional values, teaching them to be safe, just their natural ability as a father. And we're losing that because fathers are being split from their kids so much.
You're so right about that, because even in my home, I have a 14-year-old son, and he's very challenging with his mother, but he's not really challenging to me in that respect. Yes, he's typical. He's a typical boy. He challenges because he's coming into his own, and it's healthy for a son to sort of, challenge their fathers, because they're becoming a man and they need men in their lives. But the thing about it is, unfortunately, when you don't have a man in the life of the child, whether it's male or female, right? When it comes to boys, I have daughters too. And one of the things that men usually educate, most good fathers will teach, is I teach my son how to treat women the way I want my daughters to be treated.
Yeah.
And when I do that, my son has a much greater respect for girls, where to put his hands and where not to put his hands, how to speak, and how to behave properly, and to maintain those sort of inner demons inside of him that, if they didn't have that balance, they would sort of just lash out, or they would be crude, or they would give in to those, young urges that start to come in as he enters into puberty. And this is where fathers come into play, who have learned through, life's trials to guide their sons into the proper element of, what it means to be a man, and what it means to be somebody. right? The laws of men are written in the heart, the laws of God are written in the hearts of men. And same with daughters. You know, fathers have that sort of nature that make daughters feel protected, and what a man and how a man should treat them, because as they get older, they're subconsciously going to look for a man that is similar to their father in nature. Someone who has protective, who's maybe intelligent or a fighter, or somebody who, you know, knows what it means to defend themselves both emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And when they're around that and that sort of peace, they're going to identify immediately, that's a good man. I'd like to get to know them. This is where the family unit comes into play. But when you have disruption among that and you remove the man who is biblically, you know, the reason why I was able to get my wife a religious exception indefinitely from her hospital, because she works as a NICU nurse at UCLA. She is one of two people who, during the lockdowns and COVID shutouts, they were forcing everyone to get the vaccine, and she doesn't even get the flu shot.
Mhm.
And she was like, no, we're not going to do this. And I said, good. But there was a catch 22. Again, all the links that said, they wrote to everybody in each department that said only those who qualify for a religious exception can fill out the form. And she looks at me and she says, wait, only those who qualify? And I looked at her and I said, it's a trick question. Everyone qualifies under the First Amendment. Therefore, they just wanted you, that was a catchphrase. They wanted you to think that you didn't qualify. But if you question it, you probably weren't going to fill out the form. So most people didn't. My wife and I did. And it was a 1-page questionnaire. And I said, no. We're going to fill out a 15-page packet and attach it to the questionnaire, and we're going to send it in. The second stage came up, and they wrote back to my wife, and they said that she was going to have to bring into the second phase to a board to justify her religious her religious faith, her faith, right there. She was going to have to prove of her conviction. And I was like, no. And they said, please bring in your religious leader from your, you know, your whatever, your religious institution, right? Your leader, your faith leader from your religious institution. And I said, okay, write this back. That according to the Bible, of every man, God is, you know, of every man, God is the head, and of every woman, the man is the head. And therefore, I am the religious leader of the institution of our faith. Therefore, I'm going to be there in the board. And they wrote back and they said, no need to bring your husband in. We're going to move you on to the third and final phase. Because they didn't want to, because they were going to put into question my fundamental convictions, and they weren't going to do that, because then it would put her convictions in there, and they didn't want to do that. So then a third party vendor didn't know what to do with the packet, and they simply wrote back and they said, her convictions are valid. Here is her religious exception indefinitely. And I told her, sign it with your name, and then through it put without prejudice. And in UCC 1207, which is commercial code, right? And why would you do that? Well, first off, without prejudice means, people say you should have signed it with prejudice. No, because with prejudice only justifies that claim of the COVID-19. Mm-hmm. Without prejudice means that if anything else comes up, we have wiggle room to say, no, we did it for this one, so we can fight for this one, and you can't fire me. And so that's what we signed it. And I said, once they take it and they file it, it's done. Well, they filed it. It was done. And that was because, again, of fundamental, our belief and what the Bible said and what they could not argue against under the First Amendment. Again, and once you know the laws, well, they were mad at her. Her unit was mad because she was the only one not walking around with a star, like the Star of David.
Yes.
Like the Nazis,
yes,
you know, back in World War II,
yes,
they put a star on everybody that got their vaccine except for her. And people were like, oh, I think your star fell off. And she was like, no, I got a religious exception. I didn't have to take the shot and I didn't lose my job.
Yeah.
And people were fuming about that. Not necessarily her, but they're like, how did you do it? If I wasn't running, you know, during the recall back then, I was already, you know, really getting engrossed into the laws. I don't think we would have survived that. But that packet of mine, I don't know how it happened, but I helped out over, you know, almost 1,000 or so people. But I was on the phone every day, multiple times during that first year of the lockdowns. And we were helping people out on how to retain their jobs and not take the COVID-19, including yes, people that were in the military. And I was helping fight against people who were, you know, struggling with JAG. And so our packet somehow ended up online as a downloadable PDF attached to other people who had also come through, had created something similar themselves to help out everybody else to fight back and to file and send it to their, their employers that were making similar threats.
And look how much help and ground you've covered, even just in this, and I'd say, locally in your own area, or what kind of, I don't know if precedent's the right word, kind of, but that you could help and provide to so many of them. And, without my actual, medical experience or professionalism to say that it could be involved in saving lives, saving a lot of lives, because this experimental stuff we don't know. And it seems like, there could have been, or looks like there's been, serious health problems or fatalities and things like that. I like what you said about the Constitution says that the Constitution should be taught in schools. I'd like to see that, as far as changing in the school system. I read Thomas Sowell. I really love this book. American Education was a really good one. I would hope I could get my teenager. I've been a little bit estranged from to read this, and definitely my kids here at home will be very well versed with Thomas Sowell. Dismantling America was a very helpful one. It's a lot of articles he's written talking about the problems that are going on in the world right here, the vision of the anointed, and this is so-called intelligentsia that, like you said, well, it was something about they keep pushing the debt ceiling higher and higher, extremely irresponsible. And this one was like, I was like an infant reading this book, and it's hard to retain it, but it really let me know how I know nothing about economics, so this is really good. And then as we close out here, coming to the finish, like for me, if I was listening to this, it would have sparked maybe a flag to see, well, what's he talking about with climate change? I'd say go and take a look at it. It's very interesting. Solutions in there, and it's not that we could clear it up. I don't think he's pushing to say that there's some big problem or issue. And in fact, in number 7 here, it said end geoengineering. All plans that are cloud seeding, chemtrailing California skies and blocking out the sun will be escorted to a military base or shot down. Let God's green earth and its weather take its own natural course, or ending forestry and firefighting DEI programs, expanding the authority of United States Services, California Department of Forestry to work in tandem in our state, better cultivate our forests. This goes on, triple the number of incarcerated firefighter inmate programs for increased support, incentivize California fighter fire volunteer programs, increase the distance from electrical grid and forestry away from small rural and heavily dense populated areas to not affect housing and business prone to wildfires. Instead of calling on our military, state, national, and guard during typical fire season, we need to call on them in a preventative measure. So all these are really cool. These are really good to see. So if I could clear that up, because that, only for me, the only thing it would have said, oh, is that a red flag? What does he mean with climate change? I really love what I see there. And I was going to ask you about protecting our skies. And then I really don't want to venture too far off, and I don't think even I have time. Just as far as the memory, I'm kind of slightly worried about here that we should close it out soon. And I cannot.
Yeah, I'll end it with this one. When it comes to climate change, I'm not in support of climate change. That's why I wrote climate change. What are my thoughts?
Yes.
That's why I said just climate change. Oh, what's his thoughts on climate change? Climate change is completely BS. It's man-made. And when you look at, there's actually, go online, you do some simple research, that there is weather modification bills per state and per the United States legislation that permits weather modification, that these companies, individual companies, are permitted to file a test of whatever they're going to spray on a certain region of the state to see the effects. And the approvals go through certain state agencies and commissions to allow for that seeding. And when they do that, they don't always actually provide proper information as to what they're spraying. And that's where investigators have gone to actually trail these planes and stuff. The government knows what they're doing for sure, because it has to go through flight logs, and it has to go through, again, these planes have to take off and land and they enter our airspace. So there is a log to it and what they're specifically doing, because the company that's utilizing these planes has to file what specifically they're going to do. But you don't always get to know, because you have to go through, the Freedom of Information Act. You have to go through, I think it's the California Information Act as well, right? So there's a level of things you have to process, and then you have to have an attorney's license number in order for you to even obtain those documents. So when we say, well, we don't, the government's telling you, oh, well, I don't know what you're talking about, they're purposely lying, because it's designed to create geoengineering as to how they can manipulate the weather in whatever construct they want to, and whatever it is that they're spraying, we don't know. And so, of course, there's been tests that out there, and I don't want to go down conspiracy, but there is legislation that has been passed to permit the weather modifications that we see that we now call geoengineering, and it's completely egregious. And it's destroyed a lot of our weather. It's dried up our vegetation. It manipulates the weather where the weather should probably have been nice and warm. When it becomes hazy and gloomy, it also inhibits natural vitamin D and rays that we human beings require from sunlight, and it inhibits mood. It affects mood in multiple manners. So, this is all by design. And if you think it's red hat, conspiracy, whatever, tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, you're exactly the kind of person they like.
Yeah.
Because whatever they're doing, it's working on you.
This has all been extremely helpful, and I heard you say, you don't want to definitely a lot of things become down to speculation when you get into conspiracies and things like that. One thing I wanted to ask you, in case I don't get an opportunity to speak with you personally again, or say you win the administration here in California, and hopefully one day go on maybe to become the president of the United States. I don't know. I'd love to see that. I think that
Thank you.
from my own humble position, that's something I would like to see, is somebody like you. And I fully respect you. I want to ask this question about something that's very concerning to me as a U.S. citizen, and I can remove from the interview as well, because I don't want to do any type of gotcha moments here, and I want your campaign to be fully supported. And you may not want an answer. There's a woman that was a professor at Clemson University of mechanical material sciences, and she wrote a book of evidence. In fact, she did research and evidence into what really happened with 9/11. And I kind of just when I say I'm worried about the airspace in California, and you have this perfect list of solutions to handle things like wildfires or prevent them, but she went into those that did the investigation into the collapse of the World Trade Center towers. That was the NIST NC Star 1 report. And she found those contractors in there specialized in things like weather and directed energy weapons and psychological operations and things like that. And at least at the very least, I just like to introduce this book to you, or maybe you might be in power someday to be able to look at these types of things. It's called Where Did the Towers Go? I know this author, Judy Wood. She actually reached out to me. I used to read her book on another YouTube channel. I had a lot of evidence of directed free energy technology on 9/11.
Yeah, no, we have that.
Contractors.
So a lot of people don't know. I was there when the Pentagon got hit.
Okay. Wow.
So I was in DC on orders to reinstate the HS4 Black Knight beret. So
Okay.
the Black Knights were the only ones to ever wear the beret. It's funny is that guys who've gotten out right now, who are whatever in their 30s. I'm turning 50 in July, and so a lot of them are like, oh, I've never seen this, because they saw a photo of me wearing a beret. And I said, yeah, I was honoring my command when they first came out. I have all these old photos from the guys before me. They're on Facebook, the old HS4 command that used to wear the beret. I almost trashed this information late at night when I was on watch, and it said shred, but before you shred, you always have to look at the documents beforehand in case it's an accident. Sure enough, there was all this history about the Black Knight beret, and that the Black Knights were the only one to ever wear the beret in the Navy. And so I was sent to go find the final last document to reinstate it as to who gave the approval. And so I was there and I witnessed what happened. I'm not going to talk about what happened. It's just it's a big, long drawn out.
Yeah.
But as far as energy weapons and lasers and stuff, yes, we actually have them. At least, so go back 20 years ago, the laser beams that we had were on the small boy. So the small boys used to carry this, or a cruiser would carry them at the bow of the ship. And we would see the tests all the time where, they would fly like a dummy plane or something like that in motion. There was nobody in there. And it was designed in a secure area of the ocean where they would take it out of the sky and they would hit the water just to see, how it functioned and how accurate it was. And I was a witness to that. You couldn't see the beam, but the beam was there.
You can't see.
You could see it under NVGs because you would see that heat, right? Because NVGs portray a level of you can see like a heat cycle from something, and it looked like a laser beam. And so a lot of people are like, is that an energy weapon? Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's an energy weapon. They're on the bow. If you watch the movie Transformers 2, right?
In a lot of movies, yeah.
It's in a lot of movies, and they actually use the Navy ship, to like take down, and they hit the pyramid when what was it, Megatron what was it? I forgot the Constructicons or whatever, and they blew it up. Well, they used the ship. That's because it's real. We do have that, and when people say, "Oh, we don't have that kind of weapons," yes, we do. So to say that it's a conspiracy theory is just coming from people who are heavily uneducated.
They have the Directed Energy Professional Society has been around for a long time. Newsletters is back as early as the year 2000. This book's from 2005, The E-Bomb by Doug Beeson, How America's New Directed Energy Weapons Will Change the Way the Future Wars Will Be Fought. I think it holds back a lot of information, but it really tells a lot about the history of them and a timeline of how they've been brought into place. I mean, directed energy is in our TV remotes and our microwaves in our kitchen. If we think about the magic that heats up a piece of chicken and not the napkin. But I don't want to go down, to rabbit holes with there. But I really appreciate your answers to that. It's very interesting to hear some of your experiences. But I'm happy to have at least given some sort of more platform and assistance to your campaign. Thank you so much today. The information you provided, I do believe, will save lives in this interview and help guide a lot of fathers to out of emotions and going towards being educated with a perfect example like yourself, who calls yourself not a leader, but a servant. Is there anything else you'd like to close out with today before we finish up, Mr. Mercuri?
I think in closing, I would just say, do your due diligence when it comes to voting. Don't give up. At the end of the day, always vote your conscience. Don't vote the way of the party. If you see that there's only 8 candidates being presented to you on the media, you should question those candidates, because it begs the question, why is there 61? When I ask people, do you trust the mainstream media? I get a resounding no, I don't trust the mainstream media. If that's the case, then why would you trust them to tell you that there's only 8 candidates running according to their criteria when there's actually 61 candidates, and those candidates are purposely being blocked out? You should run as far away as you can from those candidates that are being presented to you by the establishment that we know is fake news media, and start doing your research exhaustingly, going down every single name or relevant of their party and compare and contrast and vote conscience. Because if you don't do that and you're more worried about winning because you think your party should win, know that the parties are 2 wings of the same bird. They will throw you a few bones and it will get back to business as usual, and you're wondering why nothing has changed. That's why, because you chose to go the easy route. You chose to listen to everybody else rather than becoming your own self-critical thinker. This is what our country is missing, is back to that critical mindset. There are better candidates, there are better options, and we are demanded to ensure that who we are voting for is that person who is constitutionally sound, does not have any major red flags, and is consistent in their nature and the character of who they are. If you realize at the end of the day that you don't know the Constitution, then you got to get studying, because you're the reasoning why you're perpetuating this government regime that is nothing more than a coup d'etat. So get educated.
Yes, thank you so much, Daniel Mercuri, for California Governor 2026. And maybe we'll see you back here again in the future. Thanks, everybody. Hit the like button if you like it. Hit the subscribe button, notification bell. Share this video, share this interview with those who think it will help. We'll see you next time.